To show you what we're aiming for in this tutorial, I have this Godot file that I've set up, and you can see a few items on there. We've got a player, some obstacles, a platform and a light. All of the objects here that you can see, the little meshes, have been made in Blender and then imported to Godot. And when I run this, you can see that I've got a player that moves through the level and interacts with the different objects there. There's a few different types of object that you might want to include in your game, so I've covered a few different ones here, and hopefully you can use those as you please. So I will quit this for now. Before we begin our project, it's really important that we try and be as organised as possible. So here you can see I've got a folder called Godot Projects, and within that I'm going to make a new folder and call that Tutorial. Then we'll open Godot. This is the Godot project window where you can open your projects, but of course we don't have one yet, and so we need to press New Project. We're going to give the project a name. I'll call it My Game. You can call yours whatever you like. And here in the project path, you can see we've got a red X telling us that this isn't a place that we can currently save this project. So we need to browse to our tutorial folder, or whatever you've named yours, and choose select this folder. You can see now we've got a tick here, and just a word of warning, there can't be anything in this tutorial folder. It has to be an empty folder that you select. Once you're done, choose Create and Edit. And here we go. So we'll come back to this screen very shortly, but now that we've got a project to import files to, we can export our Blender files. So here we are in Blender, and you can see I've got some of those objects that we've just seen in the game here in my Blender file. I have a platform, which is just a modified cube. In fact, everything is just modified cubes, very simple shapes. You, of course, can be a bit more adventurous with yours. And as you can see down here in the collection, I've got a whole bunch of things. I've got, this is a chaser that will be chasing the player along the level. I've got some spikes and so on. And of course, I've got my player. Anything that has its own animations, like a player, should be saved in the nonlinear action editor, all these different actions. So if you haven't done that, take a look at the rigging and animating tutorials, and then come back to this later. We need these actions stored, each with a unique name, and here on the left hand side, just need to make sure that they are ticked, otherwise they may not export. You can see down here all the different actions that I've got in this scene are stored in the NLA editor, and these will be exported with our models to Godot. Just taking a look at these objects, there's a few things you need to do before you export them. First, select the object, choose this button here, the Object Properties button. Make sure it has a unique descriptive name, so you're easily going to know what it is you're actually moving around. The other thing to look at is their location within the world. Now obviously in the game we want to position them where we like, but it's a really good idea to save yourself some hassle in the future to just make sure everything is at 0 in Blender. So you actually see, if I go into wireframe, that there are multiple models all on the origin here. Now this is fine because that'll be very helpful in Godot, but it doesn't make it very helpful to see what's going on in here. As you can see, it looks a little jumbled, but that's fine for now. The next thing to look at are the materials, because these will be exported with the models as well. And again, it's really important that we know what we're dealing with so that we don't get confused. So if I click here on the platform and then go to the Materials tab, you can see that this has handily been named Platform Material. You can also see that this is just an image texture that has been plonked onto this mesh here. Again, you can take more time over yours, but this is really just to demonstrate that it's pretty straightforward to export things with your own textures on. This object here, I have not named sensibly, so I will call this pink material. I've gone for a simple colour scheme where all of the enemies are one colour, and anything that benefits the player is a different colour. So now I will choose the goal, which if you want to have a little look at it, I'll just move it into view. It's just a blue cube, and here you can see that I've got the base colour of blue. It's called goal at the moment, but actually I'm going to just change that to blue matte. There we are. I've named my objects sensibly. I've named my materials sensibly, and everything is centered at the origin of the world. I'm just going to save this file, and now we can start exporting. You can export the whole scene at once, but personally I find it a little easier just to keep track of one thing at a time and export them all individually. Obviously it takes a little longer, but I'm then certain that I know what's what. So taking each object in turn, we select it. So I've selected this chaser object. We go to File, Export, and choose this bottom option here, GLTF2. And when we click on that, it brings up the file navigator. So we can choose our projects folder and the folder we just created to hold this particular project. And within that, I'm going to make a new folder called Blender Export. And inside that, I'm going to give this object a sensible name, so I know exactly what it is. And over here, I'm going to check that my settings are correct. Over here then, we can check our settings. The format, GLTF binary, that's fine. I'm going to tick this so that I don't have to change these each time. If I twirl open include, I'm going to tick selected objects because otherwise it will export the entire scene, and I just want it to do one object at a time. And just checking through the other settings, we need to make sure that this is ticked, because in Godot the y-axis is the same as the z-axis in Blender, so it goes up and down. And if we have a look under the others, these should all be ticked by default, but if not, then you can copy what is ticked here to your file. Once we check those, we can press export, and it takes us back to Blender, having exported it. We do that now for each of the objects, so I'm just going to come down my list here. There we go, so I've got this little triangle here. File, export, GLTF, and here this one I'm going to call, notice that I'm just calling them their mesh name followed by underscore mesh. You can see that the settings have been saved just as they were before. So you can now just press export and work your way through the objects until you've done them all, not forgetting to name them properly. Okay, so I'll just go through those. When it comes to a more complicated mesh, here I've got a character with bones and different parts of a mesh. What we need to do here in Blender is just right click and choose select hierarchy, and that will choose all of those objects there and include them in the export. And that's the same each time, so I'll just whiz through these last couple. I'm not going to export the sun because we can do lights in Godot. So now I've exported all of my Blender objects as GLTF files. I can now move from Blender to Godot and start working with those objects. As you just saw, as we went to Godot, it started to load a few things up, and over here now in the project we can see that we've got this Blender export folder. If we twirl this open, we can see those models and materials that we've just exported. If you haven't got all of the things that you think you exported, then obviously you can go back to Blender and redo those. To use our meshes in Godot, we need to make them into usable assets. At the moment, these meshes, if I double click this one and choose Open Anyway, here we go. Here you can see it's come in, it's got its material. We can resize it and move it and rotate it, but we can't really change the mesh or anything like that. So any changes to the mesh would have to be done in Blender. So here in Godot, it's a good idea to create different scenes, each with the individual objects in. Before we can use these in our game, we need to save our meshes as assets for Godot. If we go to Scene and choose Save Scene, you'll see that it comes up with an alert saying requested file format unknown GLB. So what we have to do is use Save As. We go to Scene, Save Scene As, and here I'm just going to delete the mesh and save it as Chaser. But before that, I'm just going to press up here. We can see we're in that Blender export folder. And I'm going to make a new folder by pressing Create Folder. And this is going to be called Assets. Now we're in that Assets folder. I've written its new file name. And you can see this time it's got TSCN at the end of it. And these are the sorts of files that we want to be able to use for our assets in Godot. So I'm going to click Save, and I need to do that for each of the meshes. If I double click it, choose Open Anyway, and here we can see we've got Falling Mesh, Scene, Save Scene As, I'm just going to call that Falling, and Save. I'm going to do that for each of these objects, double clicking the file, Open Anyway, Scene, Save Scene As, making sure it's in the right folder. If you forget to get it in the right folder, that's okay. Giving it a short, unique name and pressing Save. Next object, Open Anyway, Scene, Save Scene As, go to the correct folder and save. If I forget to change the folder, Save Scene As, so I'm not going to change the folder deliberately this time, and I'll save it. What's happened here is it gets saved in the Blender export folder, and what we can do is we can just grab that and move it up and drop it in the assets. So if you save it in the wrong folder, it's not the end of the world. You just have to keep a careful eye on the actual file names, which is why it's so important to be organized. So I will just whiz through these last few meshes. And there we go. So now we should be able to see that in our assets folder, we have all of our meshes in this .tscn format.